let's be real. For a long time it felt like we were living in a world where war with Iran was just around the corner, like a bad prequel we never asked for, with the same old war drums beating in the background, Iran always in the crosshairs. Every year the tension would rise. Military parades, fighter jets on the news, anchors talking about red lines and threats. It was all so familiar, like a sequel to a movie we already hated but couldn't turn off. Headlines blared, cable news ran endless loops, and so-called experts pointed at maps predicting disaster. The media played its part, hyping up every development, making it feel like war was inevitable. But this time, something changed. The audience, us, didn't buy tickets. We saw the poster, heard the pitch, and said, no thanks. People protested, questioned, and simply tuned out the hype. Now it's 2025 and the big war with Iran never happened. Why? That's the real story here, and it's more complicated than just politics or military strategy. This isn't just about Iran. It's about us, the public, and how we change the way we process information, question authority, and decide whether to give our consent for war. For decades, manufacturing consent was the playbook. Create a villain, flood the airwaves with fear, and get everyone on board. It worked for generations, shaping public opinion and policy. But in 2025, that machine finally broke down. The old tricks didn't work anymore. The public was more skeptical, more informed, and less willing to be manipulated. The failure to build consensus for war with Iran wasn't a fluke. It was the result of years of change, shifts in technology, media, and public awareness that made it harder to sell the old narratives. Americans have been burned before. We've seen promises of quick victories turn into endless wars, heartbreak, and loss. The scars of past conflicts made us wary of new ones. We've learned to be skeptical, to look behind the curtain, to fact-check and seek out independent voices. The internet gave us tools to question everything. This is about us. How we became harder to convince, how we started talking to each other, debating and refusing to accept things at face value. So, how did the world's most powerful propaganda machine fail? Let's break it down and see what really changed. We'll look at war fatigue, how years of conflict wore us down and made us question every new call to arms. We'll talk about the collapse of trust in institutions, from government to media, and how that skepticism spread. And we'll explore a changing world, new alliances, new technology, and a global landscape that made the old playbook obsolete. This is the story of why manufacturing consent for war with Iran flopped, and what it means for the future. Buckle up, because this is bigger than just one country or one conflict. Things are about to get real. Let's dive in and see how we change the game. First, let's talk about manufacturing consent. This isn't just a catchy phrase, it's a blueprint for how public opinion is shaped, especially when it comes to war. It's not science fiction, it's the real-world playbook for how governments and powerful interests sell war to the masses, making it seem not only reasonable, but inevitable. In a democracy, you can't just force people to support a war. You have to persuade them, win them over, and make them feel like it's their own decision, so they create a simple villain. Think Saddam or the Taliban. The enemy is given a face, a name, and a backstory that's easy to hate. The story is painted in stark black and white, good versus evil, with no room for nuance or complexity. The enemy is painted as an existential threat, a danger to our very way of life, and this message is repeated endlessly until it feels like undeniable truth. The media plays a huge role, often featuring so-called experts, many with ties to defense contractors or government, who reinforce the official narrative and rarely question it. Dissenting voices are sidelined, labeled unpatriotic, naive, or even dangerous, making it hard for alternative perspectives to break through. Remember Iraq? Back then, simply questioning the existence of WMDs could make you an outcast, ridiculed, or ignored by mainstream media. The media creates an echo chamber where only pro-war opinions are heard, amplifying the same talking points across every channel and platform. It's not always a grand conspiracy. Sometimes it's just a shared understanding among the powerful, a mutual interest in keeping the status quo. Then comes the emotional pitch. Fear, patriotism, and a sense of moral duty are stirred up, making people feel that supporting war is the right thing to do. We see images of suffering people, are told our security is at stake, and war is wrapped in the flag, making it feel like a noble cause. The goal? To make war feel not just possible but absolutely necessary, something we must do to protect ourselves and others. This system has worked for over a century, turning public opinion into a powerful weapon, mobilizing entire nations for conflict. But in 2025, something changed. The machinery jammed, and the old formulas stopped working as they once did. The old tricks didn't work. The public was more skeptical, less willing to accept the official story at face value. The public was no longer buying what they were selling. People started asking questions, seeking out alternative sources, and demanding real answers. Why didn't the playbook work for Iran? Simple. America is exhausted. After 2 decades of forever wars, a generation has grown up knowing nothing but conflict. The promises of quick victories and democracy have faded into endless deployments and staggering costs. 65% of Americans now say Iraq and Afghanistan weren't worth it. This isn't partisan, it's national consensus. The glamour of war is gone, replaced by grim reality. When the same language about Iran surfaced, imminent threats, secret nukes, people's alarm bells went off. It sounded too familiar, like a faulty product being resold. Less than 20% would support ground troops in Iran. The default is now skepticism, not trust. The heroic war narrative is gone, replaced by stories of disillusionment. The ghosts of Iraq and Afghanistan made it impossible to sell another war. The Iraq War cast the longest shadow over any talk of war with Iran. It was the ultimate case of manufacturing consent, sold on WMDs and 9/11's links, both proven false. The fallout? Catastrophic for Iraq and for U.S. credibility. Americans remember being lied to. Colin Powell's UN speech is burned into memory. So when similar arguments surfaced for Iran, the reaction was déjà vu and suspicion. Is this another WMD moment? Became a meme. The burden of proof shifted. Now the government had to prove its case beyond doubt. Old tactics lost their bite. Fear-mongering felt recycled. The Iraq War inoculated the public against war fever. That lesson was front and center as the push for Iran fizzled. Another reason the Iran war campaign failed? The media lost the public's trust. For manufacturing consent to work, people must believe the information is true. But after decades of bias and failures, especially Iraq, trust in media is at an all-time low. Only 32% trust mass media now. News is now a partisan battleground, with outlets reinforcing beliefs instead of challenging them. When war with Iran was pushed, it was filtered through this lens. If one network was for it, that was reason enough to be against it. People are more aware of corporate interests behind the news, especially ties to the defense industry. The media is seen less as a watchdog, more as a lapdog. This skepticism is healthy. It means people are asking tougher questions. Without a trusted messenger, the pro-war message just didn't land. The echo chamber broke. As trust in traditional media collapsed, social media rose. Platforms like X, TikTok, and YouTube broke the old monopoly on the narrative. Now anyone with a phone can reach millions in hours. During the Iran push, social media became a decentralized fact-checking machine. Historians, veterans, and Iranian Americans shared context and personal stories, humanizing a demonized people. TikTok and Instagram showed ordinary Iranian life, making it harder to see them as the enemy. Social media added complexity and doubt to a narrative that required simplicity. Every pro-war talking point was met with counter-arguments, memes, and stories. The public became an active participant, not a passive audience. Of course, social media is messy and full of misinformation, but in this case, it slowed the war machine. The top-down model of consent was outmatched by the chaos of the new media landscape. The people refused to be easily led. Let's talk about Donald Trump. His presidency brought hawkish policies, pulling out of the Iran deal, sanctions, assassinations. But Trump's brand was anti-war, criticizing Iraq and promising to end endless wars. This contradiction confused his base. How could the anti-interventionist now push for war? His attacks on the deep state and media meant even his own followers doubted evidence against Iran. He'd spent years telling people not to trust the CIA or the press. So when those institutions pushed for war, many dismissed it as fake news. Neither side of the political spectrum was fully on board. The left distrusted Trump, the right distrusted the institutions. Without a unified front, consensus for war was impossible. The world itself has changed. The rules that once governed international relations are no longer the same, and the players on the global stage have shifted dramatically. The US is no longer the unchallenged superpower. We now live in a multipolar world. where China and Russia have emerged as major players, each with their own ambitions and spheres of influence. Both of these nations have developed deep and strategic ties to Iran, China as a vital trading partner, investing billions in infrastructure and energy, and Russia as a steadfast military ally, providing weapons, training, and political support. Any US attack on Iran would risk direct conflict with not just one, but two nuclear powers, raising the stakes to unprecedented levels. The risk of escalation was simply too high, both for the American public, who remembered the costs of past wars, and for Pentagon officials, who understood the dangers of a wider conflict. Even traditional allies like Germany and France, who once stood shoulder to shoulder with the US, now openly opposed another US-led war in the Middle East. They saw it as reckless, destabilizing, and economically disastrous, not just for the region, but for the entire world economy, which was already fragile. Without the support of its closest allies, the US would find itself isolated on the world stage, its influence diminished. International opposition became a powerful check on the war machine, as global leaders and citizens alike condemned military action and demanded restraint. Anti-war activists pointed to this wave of global resistance as proof that the conflict wasn't about security, but about the ambitions of hawks in Washington, pushing for confrontation. The US could no longer remake regions at will without facing severe, long-term consequences, military, economic, and humanitarian. The world put up a "Do Not Disturb" sign, and for the first time in decades, Washington had no choice but to listen and reconsider its approach. The global balance of power had shifted, with new alliances and rivalries shaping the future of international relations. The old playbook was obsolete, and a new era of geopolitics had begun. So, the push for war with Iran fizzled because of a convergence of forces. War fatigue, lost trust in government and media, and a new social media landscape all played a part. Add in fractured politics and a changed world order, and the old playbook just didn't work. But is manufacturing consent dead, or just evolving? Powerful interests haven't stopped trying to shape public opinion. They're just using new tools. The next attempt might use AI, influencers, and targeted campaigns to create a synthetic consensus. The war for our minds isn't over, it's just changing. The failure to launch war with Iran is a win for skepticism and an informed public. But it's not a final victory. We have to stay vigilant, keep questioning, and demand accountability. The story of 2025 is hopeful. We still have the power to say no. The real challenge is remembering how to use it. Stay sharp.